This moving on presentation is aimed at people who are currently level 4 students who are about to become next academic year come September level 5 students, and the sorts of things that you need to know as psychology or sociology students, or if you're combining psychology and sociology with some other subject. Nonetheless, what you need to know from the psychological and sociological angles to prepare and get ready for level 5 and get the maximum benefit out of the year and hopefully some very good grades by the end of the year. Now, it is a step up. Some people find it quite a large step up to go from level 4 to level 5 in terms of the expectations around assignments and the quality of the information that you put into assignments and the amount of background reading that needs to go on. But it is a manageable one. Thousands of people have done it before you, and hopefully, human survival permitting, thousands of people will do it after you. So it is a manageable step, but obviously being prepared does help to cope with that step up in the world, to move on. So what you need to start thinking about is, first off, check what modules you've got coming up in level 5. You can find that out directly from your sociology or psychology lecturers as to what subjects you'll be covering in level 5, and ask for suggestions for a couple of books from the reading list, maybe some of the more general overview books that cover these subjects in the particularly the modules that you'll have in the very first semester, because the ones for the second semester you can tackle later. But look to acquire a couple of those books over the summer holiday, and if possible, time permitting and life permitting, have a read through, get to grips with the subject, so when you arrive for your first lecture, it's not a completely new, completely strange subject. It's something you've got a bit of background understanding of. Now, during the second year in level 5, there'll be 6 modules on offer, plus you have dissertation preparation as a module, which you have to take. Now, you're only doing 6 modules in entirety, and if you are quick at maths, you will notice that 6 plus dissertation prep equals 7. So you have to drop a module. Now, you could choose to drop a sociology one, or you could choose to drop a psychology one, or if you're combining with English or with history, then you could choose to drop an English one or a history one instead. Entirely up to you. Most students usually drop whichever module they are least interested in. Sometimes there are students who just don't like the type of assessments a particular module has and make their decisions on the basis of the assessment more so than the topic. But it's entirely up to you which of the modules to drop and which 5 modules to combine with the dissertation prep module. If you're not too sure which one to drop, talk to one of your lecturers, ask them for a bit of advice and feedback as to what those modules are about, and that will help you make that decision. Now, it may be, of course, that you hear about all of the modules on offer and they sound all really good, and there's not one that obviously leaps to mind as something you really don't want to do. In which case, that's probably definitely where you need to talk to a lecturer and really think about it. It may be a choice reflecting your wishes to engage in dissertation in level 6, that perhaps there is a subject less relevant to your hoped for dissertation than another subject, and so you can make the decision to drop perhaps on that basis more than on any other basis. But normally you register your decisions towards the end of the summer, just before you come back, so that the admin staff know which students are doing which modules and can plan accordingly for classroom size and that sort of thing. Now, one thing you will need to do not only over the summer, I already mentioned background reading, but during the duration of level 5 is lots and lots of reading. Now, some of the reading will be books, some will be journals, some will be online articles, and you can supplement your reading with things like listening to podcasted lectures, TED Talks, that sort of a thing, to broaden and extend your knowledge beyond what you hear in the classroom. And that's a key issue, because whereas at level 4, there's been a certain amount of repeating theories, ideas you've heard from lecturers in classrooms, and using your lecture notes and uploaded PowerPoints as a starting board for writing your assignments and your essays, and you're often referring back to those particular theories that have already been covered. The expectation in level 5, and this remains the case in level 6 as well, is that you will read beyond what you hear in class. So whatever theories your lecturer tells you about, you'll go out there and find out about some other theories as well, and perhaps share them with other students. And so, I've read this book, it was really good, or I've read this book and I didn't understand a word of it. Does anyone have a better grip on it than I do? And you'll be exchanging ideas with each other as well as with your lecturer. And so when you sit down to write an assignment, be it an essay or a report or whatever type of an assignment it might be, you can work in and incorporate additional theories outside of the ones covered in class. And in fact, doing so will help you get a higher grade because it shows the capacity you have for research, for background reading, for delving deep, rather than just repeating what you've heard in class. So that's what's going to improve your grades and up them fairly considerably if you do some decent background reading. Where you're looking at an assignment which asks you to evaluate an idea, then an important thing to do is look at contrasting approaches. So rather than just putting one point of view from one theorist, you would look to find theorists who disagree with each other. So you can say, person A thinks this, however, person B thinks the opposite. And so you're putting in contrasting theories and contrasting ideas. And that again will help to improve your grade. And it shows, because it shows that you are thinking about the other side of the argument. You're not just taking one side of an argument and running with it. It's generally good for grasping subjects at large as well as just the issue of coursework grades. Because it's very easy, especially if you've got a point of view you're very passionate about. Maybe you are a socialist, or you're a dyed-in-the-wool Tory, or you're a feminist, or you're a structuralist, or a symbolic interactionist, whatever it is that really grips you. It's very easy to see everything you look at from that one point of view and not consider that other people in the world will think from other points of view, and that their other points of view might be very valid ones. Just because they don't embrace your particular pet ideology or pet theory doesn't mean that their ideas and proposals are wrong. And so it's part of this is expanding beyond your own personal convictions to think about how do other people think, how do other people feel, what motivates them to see the world the way they do, what evidence do they base their view of the world upon, and to read about it and evaluate it and assess it. And certainly evidence is a thing that will be key to your success in level 5. So what sort of things should you be reading? Whether it's you raiding the library or going down secondhand charity shops or ordering online or going over to Watakers or one of those places in town and getting your books from there, wherever it is you get your books, which book should you get? Well, you'll have a recommended reading list within each module, so that will be your guiding light. But of course, there's nothing to stop you wandering through the libraries and bookshops, plucking other books off the shelf and having a go at them. Now, you can read pretty much anything you like, really, but the key issue here is not so much what you read, but what you cite as a reference work in your assignments. And something you should avoid citing as a reference work in your assignment are books that involve the phrase introduction to. During the first year in level 4, you will have read a lot of introduction to type books. They're aimed at people who've never encountered a subject before and are wanting to get to grips with the basics, and that's what level 4 is about. Level 5 assumes you've already got the basics, and you're now trying to progress beyond the basics. So whilst reading a book with the title Introduction to So-and-so subject is all well and good, that's just meant to be a starting point leading you on to something deeper. So don't use those books as citational texts for essays and assignments. Use the more in-depth books and journals for citation in your coursework. And indeed, journals particularly as well as books are a good idea, because a lot of first year reading lists are essentially one book after another after another. At this level, you should also be considering journal articles as well as full-on books. They're quicker to read, for one thing, and they're often more in-depth and more specialist about a very specific subject, whereas books tend to be broader in their perspective and therefore not go into as much depth usually. So it's branching out into those sorts of directions that you need to aim for. And again, if you're not sure which journals are good journals and to look into, you can ask for advice from the librarians, and you can ask for advice from your lecturers on that one. If you need advice, I suggest you get it early on at the start of the summer holiday, rather than asking them in the middle of August when, COVID permitting, some of us might be off on holidays and therefore not looking at emails. The kinds of information you should be looking at in terms of books and journal articles and web articles and the rest of it are evidence-based articles. And this is something you don't tend to see a lot of in the introduction to type books. They tend to more cover theory more than they do evidence. So somebody proposes a theory, it could be a psychologist, a sociologist, or whoever, proposes a theory and says, I think this is true about the nature of the world. Not all theorists go on to back up their theories with hardline research. Some do, but not all of them. And when you're writing your assignments at level 5, the more you can include a bit of hard research, the better the grade you're likely to get. That's what's going to help push it up a few marks and improve your overall grade by the end of the year. So part of that is thinking about what you would consider suitable evidence for something. And that does depend, of course, on the claim that's being made. But the more you can bring in evidence, the better it will be in terms of the result you get for your work, as well as your basic understanding of the subject and the ability to move beyond vague theory into a more applied real-world scenario. So to give you an example of how this might work, Michel Foucault puts forward the idea that when people are being observed by authority figures, which could be anything from your boss at work through to government figures, people in government in political authority, they tend, by and large, to be more obedient and better behaved because they know they're being watched. This is an idea not exclusive to Foucault. Before Foucault was even born, it was an idea being advanced by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. He proposed a prison design called the panopticon, in which prison guards could very easily see, because of the way the prisons were built, very easily see what prisoners were getting up to. And the idea is that they would both be able to prevent fights or suicide attempts or what have you taking place in the prison. But also, if the prisoners knew they could easily be seen, they weren't very likely to engage in such naughty behaviours in the first place. And they would therefore be more obedient to the prison regime. And this is Bentham's idea is something that Foucault talks about quite extensively. So if we take that as an idea, people who are observed by those in authority over them will tend to be better behaved than people who are not being observed by those in authority over them. That's a nice theory. What sort of evidence would we expect for that theory to back it up? If that theory is true, what kind of evidence would you expect to see in the world? Now, if we were all meeting in person, this is where we could have a discussion as a class. But we're not doing that. So if you want to pause this video, have a think, have a coffee, and then play it again after you've had a think, that would be good. But even if you just want to plow straight on, give you examples of what might constitute evidence, you could stick with the prison example, you could look at prisons and say, is there any evidence that prisons which are highly monitored, and here you might need to compare prisons in different periods of history or in different parts of the world, prisons where there is a high level of monitoring of the inmates go on, do those prisons have a lower level of violence, of suicide, of self-harm, of infringements of the prison rules and regulations than those prisons in parts of the world or periods of history where there is very little observation taking place, and prisoners can largely do as they please without the guards or the wardens noticing what they're getting up to half the time. Would you see similar examples perhaps from classrooms? Maybe with children rather than adults necessarily. So are children who are under the watchful eye of their teachers likely to be better behaved than children left to their own devices when the teacher is off somewhere else and can't see what the kids are getting up to? Is there any evidence of that? What about things like internet surveillance? If people know that the government can track their internet history, what they're looking at, what they're saying to people, what they're buying, what they're selling, and all the rest of it online, are they significantly less likely to look at dodgy porn sites or political extremist sites or buy illegal goods online or discuss criminal behaviours online if they know that they are being monitored, compared to the people who don't know that they're being monitored? Now, as it happens, we're all being monitored all the time on the internet. It's just that monitoring sometimes is not very effective. But you could look to see, have there been any research projects in terms of how people's behaviour alters online when they know they're being monitored to when they either don't know or believe that they're not being monitored. So you might look to all sorts of practical evidence, and the evidence would be, does rates of bad behaviour go up or do rates of bad behaviour come down? Are there more crimes or less crimes? More people looking at dodgy websites or fewer people looking at dodgy websites? So you would be looking at fluctuating patterns of statistics, and those statistics are either going to back up what Foucault is theorizing, or they're going to suggest that Foucault is perhaps wrong, and that his arguments just don't pan out in reality. Where might you look for such evidence? Well, depending on what type of evidence you want, you could go to the Home Office and look at statistics and government reports around the prisons, or you could look at reports from educational psychologists about good and bad behaviour in schools, or you could again look at either government reports, or you could look at reports compiled by companies like Facebook or Twitter or Google, where they're monitoring the internet usage patterns that go on. There's all sorts of places you could look to for evidence. Some of it will have been conducted by sociologists or by psychologists, and some of it will be conducted by other people entirely. There is no reason why you can't bring in evidence from somebody other than a psychologist in a psychological essay, or evidence from someone other than a sociologist in a sociological essay. The majority of the people you cite should be familiar in the discipline, but that doesn't mean you can't bring in the occasional outside voice, particularly if that outside voice is providing practical evidence that either backs up or disproves some theory proposed by a psychologist or by a sociologist. So this is the sort of thing that will get you the better grade. If you just say, Michel Foucault thought this, full stop, you'll get a grade because what you've said is correct, so you will get a basic grade for that. But if you can then resort to evidence and say, research conducted by Joe Bloggs in such and such an area, looking at these statistics, showed that 30% of people did this and 40% of people did that, and this is the level of detail you need to go into. You're not just saying research was done. You're going into some level of detail about that research, citing statistics and patterns and evidentiary observations. If you can bring that in, that's what's going to push your grade up. And again, if as you're going along in level 5, if you think, I'm a bit stumped in this essay, I don't quite know where to look for the sort of information I need, that's when you need to talk to your lecturers, and they will give you pointers about where to look for information. It's not being hidden from you, it's there, and will direct you to it if you ask. It's the analysis that gets you the higher grade. So I've already said, as well as just describing the theories of various psychologists or sociologists, as the case may be, look for evidence. Evidence to support them, or equally, evidence to contradict them, depends on what you find in terms of evidence. What would be the likely result if their theory is correct? What would you expect to see? Is there any evidence in support of the thing that you expect to see? You might want to consider some of these other angles here as well. So some of the theories, Freud and Weber on the screen, there are two good examples, are from decades and decades and decades ago. These are old theories. Now, some theories may be true for pretty much all of human existence. What was true 50 years ago is true today and will be true in 100 years' time, perhaps. But other theories date quite quickly. They are true of a particular period of history, of a particular time, when people behaved or thought in a certain way. But 50 years later, 100 years later, the world has moved on, people no longer behave in that way, they no longer think in that way, and therefore the theory isn't wrong per se, it was just true at that time. We are just now in a different time, and therefore different theories may apply. So you can take a chronological critique and say, well, this theory was fine back in 1921, however, the world has changed. 100 years later, things are very, very different. People no longer behave in this way, think in this way. Therefore, this theory no longer really applies. However, here is another theory which would apply more suitably to the present day. And that's a useful thing to do. It's one thing to disprove or dismiss the theory as dated or lacking evidence. It's an even better thing if you can bring in a replacement theory and say, well, the first theory may not be great, however, here is a better theory, something which has more evidence to support it, or is better suited to modern life. And so contemporary research, in other words, research from within the last 10 or so years, is particularly useful to cite. Now, there's no reason why you can't bring in theorists who were writing 70, 80, 100 years ago. It's just that if you can add to them with research from within the last few years, which backs up, adds to, or challenges what the classic theorists said, that's what's going to bring you the higher grade. The fact that you've brought it up to date. Critiquing theory is also a useful thing to do. Critiquing doesn't mean you have to rip things apart and say they're rubbish. You can critique in a positive way. You can say this is a really good theory, and here are 3 reasons why it is a really good theory. Equally, you can say this is a bad theory, and here are 3 reasons why it's a bad theory. It's just looking at the validity, the plausibility of a theory, which can include challenging concepts and assumptions, even if lots and lots of people hold to those assumptions, hold to these ideas. That doesn't mean you can't challenge them, question them, look at the evidence for them. You'll certainly gain a higher grade if you look at that kind of issue. What's the evidence? What's the quality of this theory? Just because a lot of people like it doesn't mean it is automatically true. So you can ask challenging questions and provide answers, which is a general bit of guidance. If you are going to put a question mark somewhere in your assignment, pose a question, literally pose a question, look at the question mark at the end. What you need to do in the very next sentence is answer it. Don't use rhetorical questions, ones that you ask but have no intention of answering. Only use questions if you can directly answer them in the next sentence. Improving on writing skills. Some of you have extremely good writing skills, some of you are in the process of polishing them up, but even people with extremely good writing skills can still get better. So what's the sources, the methods to aid you in getting better? Well, we are very lucky in that we have Ben Farrell and Nita Rooney, who are available and around to help you with things like proofreading, and they can advise on structure. Now, they're not subject specialists. They don't necessarily know everything there is to know about every psychological theorist or sociological theorist to go in. That's not what they're there for. That's what lecturers are there for. But what Ben and Anita can do is read through your work and say, well, if you swap these 2 paragraphs over and put them in a different order, or drop that sentence there, it doesn't make any sense. Or point out that you've missed a word and you need to add a word in, or your grammar is a bit all over the place. Your spelling is sometimes inaccurate, you need to change this word, change that word. They can polish the work up for you, and they can give you advice on referencing and citation, how to lay out your references properly, and if you've said something and you've not backed it up with a citation, they can point out you need to add in a citation to this paragraph to back up the point you've made there. So they can give you all that sort of advice and guidance, and they're lovely people and very good at what they do. So bring that in. I would say for the benefit of their sanity, try not to leave it to the last minute. If your assignment is due in on Friday and you don't show them your work till Thursday, then you can't expect them to work miracles in a short space of time, because the chances are you won't be the only one sending in your work on Thursday. If they're totally swamped, they can only answer so many people within the space of a day. So if you can approach them earlier on, not that your work doesn't need to be totally finished, you can have half an essay done, and you just want a bit of input from them on half an essay. That's fine. That works well. And maybe when you finish the second half, you can get input on the second half. But take your work to them at a paced, measured speed, so that they're not drowning in 50 students all wanting help within the space of 24 hours before the deadlines are on. So just take it sensibly in terms of not swamping Benringer with demands for help and aid. But do make use of them over the course of the year, because they're fantastic at improving your work. Stick to the third person. It's very easy to start saying, I think this, or you should do that in the course of an assignment. In psychology and sociology, we don't do that. Almost all of the time in both sociology and psychology, everything should be in the third person pronoun. It is thought that. The evidence shows that. Experts recommend that, as opposed to I, me, you, they. The only time you would use the first person is where you're writing a reflexive assignment, something like a journal or a reflexivity section in a sociological report. The rest of the time it's third person. And if you're not sure, ask your lecturer, or ask Ben, or ask Anita, and they will be able to advise you on that one. Now, lots of people like to use quotes, especially at the level 4 at first year, because you're discovering all of these researchers and writers, and it's tempting to kind of bring in their wisdom at every juncture. Once you get into second year, and the same is true of third year as well, but even more so, try to keep the quotes to a minimum. Don't be trotting them out every third sentence is a quote. What we're looking for as lecturers is your voice and your view. We know what Freud said about stuff, we know what Weber said about stuff. We want to know what you think, but you're backing up your thoughts with research and evidence, not necessarily long rambling quotes. If someone has said some real pithy quote, very kind of Oscar Wilde type of quote, that really sums something up, by all means put in a quote, but use it sparingly. It's a bit like salt in food. A little bit is nice, too much it's inedible. So use your quotes just a little bit to spice things up, but don't drown your work in quotations. And similarly, when it comes to citations, a lot of students, if they've cited evidence from Joe Bloggs in 2012, they can therefore virtually repeat an entire passage from Joe Bloggs' book, 99% identical to what it says in the book, in their assignment. So it's not exactly a quote, it's not in quotation marks, but it's as near as that. You should avoid doing that. What you're aiming to do with both quotations and citations is to give the gist of someone's idea and research in your words, not just repeat verbatim from their words. So when we're reading it as lecturers, it shouldn't look like you've just cut and pasted 30 paragraphs from 30 different books. and rearrange the order. It should look like your thoughts, your ideas, your language, your words, drawing on evidence, drawing on resources from authors and writers, but putting it in your words as much as possible. Because what we want you to do, especially in the second year, ready for the third year in your dissertation, is to find your voice. Now, what on earth does finding your voice mean? It means getting a sense of your point of view, the way you think. When you are faced with a question, how do you respond to it? What do you think about it? You've read around, you've looked at the books and journal articles and the rest of it. You've weighed up the theories, you've weighed up the ideas. What do you think about them? If 10 different researchers say 10 different things, which one do you think is correct? Where do you think the weight of evidence lies? Who's talking rubbish and who is accurate? So this is you finding your way of expressing yourself. Now, admittedly, in subjects like psychology and sociology, that can be a bit of a struggle, because unlike something a bit more literary, where you can wax lyrical, you've kind of got to keep to the point in psychology and sociology science, but you are still going with what you believe to be true, rather than just quoting chunk after chunk after chunk, word for word of what somebody else has said, what somebody else has written. So if you're citing research by Joe Bloggs, you can critique the research. Let's say Joe Bloggs is a psychologist and has conducted an experiment to prove some point. Did Joe Bloggs conduct the experiment very well? Or was the experiment flawed? Because you can point out that that's part of the critique. You can point out the flaws in the research. Or you could say Joe Bloggs' research was conducted using a sample of 20 people. In order to make a grand statement about society, we need more research with more people. 20 subjects in an experiment is not enough. So the experiment may have been conducted quite well. It was just conducted on a very small group of people, and in order to make grand statements about the nature of humanity. This experiment needs to be replicated in a much bigger scale with a much larger number of people. So that's you bringing your critique. You've read it, you've understood it, you've seen the flaws in it, and you're thinking, well, yes, I can see where Joe Bloggs is going, but he hasn't thought about this, he hasn't thought about that. And so that's you bringing in your ideas, your thinking, your reasoning, your rationale, your assessment of the evidence. You're not just saying, well, Joe Bloggs said it's true, therefore it must be true. And repeating Joe Bloggs like he was some mystic guru who can never be wrong about anything. You're saying these researchers, these psychologists and sociologists, they're human beings, they make mistakes, they have flawed ideas. Sometimes the research they carry out is a bit dated or old-fashioned or no longer relevant or limited or just rubbish in the first place. And you are evaluating what they've done and thinking and applying your knowledge, your understanding of academic rigor and how to conduct experiments properly and all the rest of it. You're applying that and demonstrating it in your coursework. So this is what we want to find, not 500 quotes from other people, but your voice. I'm sure you're sick to death of my voice at the moment, but nevertheless. Many of the modules will involve a presentation. I know a lot of people cringe at the thought of having to do presentations, but it's regarded by the Department of Education as a very useful workplace skill. If you can be good at lots of jobs these days involve talking to customers, talking to clients, giving presentations, this, that, and the other thing. And so if you can practice it and develop it and improve it as a skill in the course of your education, then when you're changing jobs, you can bring that talent with you to whatever new job it is that you go into. Now, you don't have to launch blind into your presentations. You can say to your other students in the class, you can say to your lecturers, I know we've got a presentation coming up in 3 weeks' time. I'm a bit nervous. Can I have a dry run? Do you mind sitting and listening to me giving the presentation? If your lecturer's got the time to do so, I'm sure they'll say yes. But even if they're a bit busy, you could ask your fellow students and say to the lecturer, could you book us a classroom somewhere for half an hour so we can meet up and have a crack at doing our presentations before the real deal? And therefore you get the experience of stumbling and oh, actually that doesn't make sense, or I need to change the order in which I do the slides, or oh, I should have added this thing in, or there was no point talking about that thing, it wasn't relevant. You get the kind of feedback where you can polish up your presentation ready to deliver it. Now, a lot of people, when they're doing presentations, especially if they've never done a presentation before, or they haven't done one for years and years and years and years, so it feels like it's a first time, will often rely heavily on notes and read out notes. Now, you can use notes, especially if your notes involve maybe statistics, you want to quote numbers and dates, and you want to make sure you get those correct, that's fine. Where you will struggle to get a really good grade is if you just stand in front of the class and read off a piece of paper for the whole time. One of the reasons for this is that what we're looking for is for you to be confident in your knowledge of theory and evidence. So if you're just looking at a piece of paper, it kind of suggests that you're not sure, and therefore you have to read out what's in front of you because you can't quite remember what the details of it are. Whereas if you can put the notes in your pocket and say, well, Freud said this, and Foucault said that, then that shows that you have confidence in those ideas. And of course, what you put on the PowerPoint in terms of points of writing and information can be used to jog your own memory, as well as present names and statistics and dates and details like that to your class that you're doing the presentation for. You can do your presentations to the entire class of fellow students, or if that unnerves you, you can ask your lecturers if it's okay to do a one-to-one with them. Most lecturers will say yes. We do have to record presentations because the second mark and the external examiner like to be able to look at them. But once they've all been marked and graded and done, then the presentations are deleted. So you have no worries that one day your presentation is going to find its way into some on Facebook or something and everyone's going to laugh at it. That's not going to happen because those presentations are deleted when they're no longer required for grading purposes. And you can ask to watch your own presentation back in order to kind of critique yourself and think, oh, actually, I did that really well. Or equally think, oh, I could have done that bit a bit better. So you can ask for access to your, you can't see each other's recordings, but you can ask for access to your own recording, just so you can get a sense of how well you did it, how you could have improved it. What I would say in terms of the PowerPoint, the slides, don't drown them in writing. Small ideas, small points, lots of pictures, easy to read graphs are much better in the presentation than so much writing it drowns the people looking at it, or tiny graphs where hardly anyone can work out what it says, or something that's just screen after screen of words with no pictures, no colour, no pizzazz. So put a bit of pizzazz in it. And that will again improve your grade a bit as well as making it more interesting for your audience. And you can always ask people in the audience to have questions up their sleeves that you're confident of the answer to, just for them to get some Q&A bit at the end. It helps get the ball rolling. There is number crunching in level 5. I know you've done number crunching, psychology students certainly have done number crunching at level 4 as well, but there's more of it at level 5. So psychology students mainly look at quantitative methods, mainly how to calculate numbers, conduct experiments, working out the maths with those experiments afterwards. And if you do have any issues with maths, not everyone is good at maths, you can talk to your lecturers, and they will give students a bit of advice and pointers and guidance in that one. And there are support networks available in college to assist with that as well. Sociology students will look mainly at qualitative methods, things like thematic coding for interviews and that sort of thing, where there isn't much maths, but there are analytic techniques, and in both sociology and psychology, there are computer packages that will help you with analyzing interviews or evaluating patterns of information and non-approaching. So psychology students look at a computer system called SPSS, and sociology students look at a system called Atlas TI. Some of these, both of these you can get as free trial downloads where they remain available on your laptop for a couple of weeks before they delete themselves. And the computers around the college has arrangements with the companies who operate SPSS and Atlas TI, buys licenses of them, and they're installed on computers around the college. So you can gain access to those systems both on your home laptop and also at the college in the computer rooms. Well, some of them, not every single computer room, but some of them have these systems installed. And the lecturers will take you through how to use them. Plus, you can supplement that with various podcasts. There are uploaded podcasts on YouTube of people who will run you through, press this button, press that button, click on the other button, and it will do whatever you want it to do, type of tutorials and guide you through the usage of them. The maths at level 5 is done on the computer rather than by hand. So this moves up to a slightly different level. So again, if you are not the most computer literate person in the world, maybe you're a little bit unnerved by computers, again, let your lecturer know, and there are support networks in the college that can help improve your computing skills in general, not just in regards to SPSS or Atlas, but so you can work around that one. Okay, at level 6 you do your dissertation, but you start thinking about it at level 5. You start to contemplate subjects you could do and methodologies you could do. That's why we have the methodological modules, so you can get to grips with ideas like experimentation and interviewing and surveys and questionnaires and visual ethnographies and things like that, and decide which ones you really like the sound of and which ones you would prefer to avoid, because that will help you make the decisions not only what subject you want to do your dissertation on, but also do you want to do an experiment, do you want to do a survey, do you want to do a questionnaire, do you want to do this, do you want to do that. So you can think about the methods. It's just as important to decide what you don't want to do as it is to decide what you do want to do, because it helps to narrow down the field. Now, it may be that at this stage already in level 4, you've got ideas in your head. You might think, oh, I'm really interested in this subject. I found that thing, that topic really interesting. I'd quite like to do a dissertation about that. Or equally, you may be thinking, good Lord, that subject bored me to tears. I really don't want to do a dissertation on that, which is also quite a useful thing to do, because it helps, again, to narrow down the field of possibilities. But over the course of level 5, you'll be bouncing around ideas, thinking, would this be interesting, would that be interesting? And you're looking at practical issues such as, if I go and interview people, what kinds of people can I lay hands to interview? If I'm going to experiment on people, what kinds of people can I find to take part in an experiment? So you'll be thinking about the pragmatic issues as well as the themes and issues around topics and ideas like criminality, mental illness, and positive psychology, and sociological theories or power structures, and all the rest of it. All those things that we cover at level 4 and level 5, getting a flavour for them and choosing where you want to go in your dissertation. It's a 10,000 word dissertation, and at this point in time you might think, oh my god, there's 10,000 words, that's the whole novel. It might seem like a huge amount, so it does for most people. However, I will tell you now, and you may not believe a word I say, that by the time you get to level 6, you'll believe it. When you're writing your dissertation, the main problem you will likely have is cutting it down to 10,000 words. Because if you are wise and sensible, and you choose a subject you're very interested in and very keen on, you'll get the ball rolling, and you'll write and write and write and research and research and research and all of a sudden you've realised that you've got 12,000 words or 15,000 words, and your lecturer is telling you to cut it back down to 10. Time and time and time again, with one student after another that I've supervised over the years, the real problem they have is keeping it down to 10, not thinking how the hell can I write 10,000 words in the first place. Because by and large, most students do the sensible thing and go for a topic that genuinely interests them. If you're going to write 10,000 words about something, please don't write 10,000 words on a topic that bores you to tears. Write something that's going to engage you. So, we start thinking about it at that. And the ball rolls from there. And so we come to the end of this transitional one. I dare say some of you will have questions. You can email them to me. Or indeed, you could email your questions to Christian or to Karen or to anybody else in the department you want to talk to, Laura, for example, all sorts of people you could talk to. If you have questions about what you need to do, think about get ready for level 5. Hopefully, touch wood, the whole coronavirus situation will have been resolved by then, and we'll all be leading up for normal lectures face-to-face, and the world will be back on track. But if it isn't, then I'm sure we'll all find some way to cope and address the situation. But let's leave it there for now. Look forward to seeing you come September. Stay safe, stay well, and enjoy.